Hey everyone, I'm Donna Dracunis, and this is a session of Procreate and Tech Tips with Sequential Artist Workshop. Today we're going to talk about watercolor in Procreate because it's World Watercolor Month, and I'm doing a lot of watercolor in my comics. I do a lot on paper, but I do a lot on Procreate too. So I figured let's just do watercolor stuff today. And what I'm going to do is show you mostly my favorite brushes and how they work and what's the difference between them and all of that stuff. So this here is a list of my brushes. Do not try to copy it off of there. I'm going to paste it in the chat right now. It's a list of my favorite watercolor brushes. And then for the YouTube video, I'll get it included in the description. So those are my favorite watercolor brushes that I'm going to demo today in Procreate. And so I just typed them in there. So this is kind of what we're going to talk about. We're going to mostly talk about brushes, but we're going to talk a little bit about paper because some of the Procreate watercolor brushes are very smooth, and some are more textured, and some of them have like what looks like a little bit of paper texture in the brush, and some of them look just like flat coloring and there's no paper texture in the brush. So that's, to me, seems like one of the main differences between the different kinds of brushes that I have used. So I'm going to start with this set here. It's from Calvin at Drifter Studios, and Calvin at Drifter Studios. And again, you can look in the chat or on YouTube down in the text underneath and find all of these. And Calvin sells brushes on Etsy and other places, and he has a YouTube channel where he has lots of tutorials how to use them. This is his basic watercolor brush set that I have, and there's 3 brushes I use out of here all the time. This mist brush I love, and the one that he uses all the time that I also use all the time is the abstract round, and then there's a water blender. So I'm going to kind of show you how those work and how his brushes are set up. Yeah, and we'll look at that. So if you notice, I'm opening my layers here, and on the top of the layer stack is this watercolor texture that has 2 images. This one here is set to darker color and it's locked. So I'll unlock it so I can just show you how it's set. Come on, unlock. It's set to darker color and the opacity is at 35%. That's how it came. And this one, which I'll also unlock, is set to color burn and about 70%. Now this comes with his brushes. It's a watercolor paper that adds texture and kind of darkens the colors of the brushes. So his brushes are very smooth. This is a sample that came with the brushes that he made. And if I zoom way in, you can see there's lots of texture in where the paint is. And in the light colors, it's hard to see on the screen, but there's texture even in the white. And what these 2 layers do, this one's called the paper background, and that adds the texture to white areas. And this other one that doesn't really have a name, he didn't name it, adds the texture to the painted areas. So you see, if I turn that off, there's no texture in these, and see how pale the colors get? So his brushes are made to work with his paper. So I'll turn that off. Oh, and I had changed the background color. Usually the background color is just white, but I had changed it to tan because I wanted it to look like tan watercolor paper when I was messing around with this. But anyway, you can, of course, turn the background on and off. When I turn the background off, you can see what that paper texture is doing to the background. It doesn't show up on the screen very good when I turn this on through the iPad, through the camera, through Zoom and everything, but there is texture in the background. So it looks like you've actually painted on watercolor paper. So if I turn off his painting and I would add a layer to paint underneath the paper texture layer, and I could go in to the brushes, and I've got a whole bunch of watercolor brushes, and I will pick his set, and it's called Aquarelle Brushes when you install it, but that's not the name of his product. It's just watercolor brushes or great watercolor brushes or something, I don't remember, but we search for his name. So I'm going to pick the abstract round, which is, this is the brush he uses the most. And okay, go away. We'll pick a color that's not black, and the abstract round is what he uses to make most of his paintings. Uses it a lot for washes, whether it's filling a shape or a background. Now you can see I did not pick my pen up the whole time, and most of this looks pretty smooth blended, but sometimes when I went over a spot again, it got darker. And that's kind of cool because paint will do that sometimes. So if you go pick your pen up and make multiple strokes, it works like glazing, like as if that first stroke was dried and then I painted another stroke on top of it and the color builds that way. So that's his main brush. And then there's a brush called the Water Blender. And even though it's a blender, it's not used with the smudge tool, it's used with the paintbrush tool. And this can be set to different sizes. And basically you just kind of tap around with it to smooth out any hard edges you want to get rid of. Now you can make it big and really push the stuff around too, if you wanted to do it really severely blended.
How is it different from the smudge tool? How do you find it different?
He made it to use as a brush. So the smudge tool you can use with any brush. So so depending what you have picked for the smudge tool, it works different ways. But this was made by Calvin to be used as a brush, not a smudge tool. So that's why I use it that way, because he's made it and that's how he said it works best. That's the only reason. Smudge tool works fine. I use it sometimes. I have some brushes I like for the smudge tool, but for this set, I usually use his. It works really cool. I like it. His set comes with all these brushes, and it also comes with this bonus, what he calls a bonus set. And some of these are similar, but some of these are cool specialty ones. So like here's a spidery blender he has. Whoops. And if you use that blender, you can make it look like the colors like bleeding more. Then this is especially cool if you have painted with a couple colors with his main brush or any of his other big brushes for making washes. Now, if I use that spider blender and blend that together, it kind of looks like the one color. You know how when you touch the one color to another on real watercolor and it goes into it because the pigment is spreading in the water, you can make it look like that. So I like his brushes a lot. I have this set and several other sets of his because he has a special set with salt. This is a sample of the salt that he has in his main set. So it makes like little specks, like you put salt on the wet paint. He has a whole set of different salt textures. There's a tree sample brush in here. He has a whole set of pine brushes. which are, I love these for painting backgrounds. You just go like that. Like, there's a happy little tree. He has a whole set of those that are like different species of pine trees and stuff. So his brushes are really cool, but they do work best with his paper. If I turn his paper off, see how kind of bland everything looks now? It's just flat and there's no texture in it and the color looks kind of blah. So these brushes work best with the paper textures. And what's really cool is that he has in his Etsy store extra paper textures. So if you like the way a certain kind of watercolor paper looks, he's got different brands of watercolor paper that he scanned and made into a paper setup like this that you can download. You know, you can buy them from him and download them and use them. So he's got some that look like hot press paper, cold press paper. I forgot what the specific brands are he have, but they all have a little bit of different texture on them. So that's Calvin at Drifter Studios. And just to show you, this is something I made from one of his tutorials using his brushes. So I was going through his techniques and using his brushes, and then I decided to make different variations of that character as if I was going to draw a comic character out of her. So you'll notice something here that I want to show you how to do is that there's light areas in here that have a sharp edge. And then there's lighter and darker areas in here. And in the shirt, there's like different colors, right? But when I showed you using the brushes, we didn't really do any of that stuff. And this is something that that works really cool with these brushes that's very different than some of the other techniques that I use a lot. So let me show you what's done with that. So we'll pick some color again, and I'll draw a shape. And actually, I should draw, pretend it was like more like the background behind that character, right? So I'm drawing this shape, just making it kind of abstract. And then I'll go in and I used the abstract round, which is the main brush that that he uses the most in his demos. Then I'll take the water blender and I'll get rid of some of the, whoops, I wanted to leave the outside edge sharp, but I'll get rid of some of those sharp lines inside the shape, tap around a little bit. Okay, now what Calvin does a lot is he uses the selection tool in freehand. So to make those leaf shapes that were in the back of the drawing that I showed you that I made, I selected a shape like that. So I just did with freehand in selection and I drew kind of leaves. And then I tapped the starting gray dot to close the selection. And then I went into hue, saturation, and brightness, and I bumped up the brightness a little bit. So now when I turn the selection off, I've got that shape with another shape kind of silhouetted or reverse silhouetted out of it. So that's one thing he does. He uses selections with his brushes a lot. Another thing he'll do is, again, a freehand selection and go over a shape like, say, the shirt with kind of random swirls. Again, touch the beginning where you started selecting to close the selection. And then he will go in and feather the selection. That makes the edges of it not sharp. And then he'll go into hue, saturation, and change the hue, saturation, and brightness however he wants to in there. And when you turn the selection off, you can see it's just a little bit multicolored and darker and lighter. So that is just an overview of those brushes from Calvin at Drifter Studios. And it's a pay set, and it comes with paper. So this is just, I want to show you one brush, but I have a whole little set. This is from Brenda Bakker, and I took some of her Skillshare classes because she has all these fun little watercolor classes on there, and it's worth taking her class. You can get, if you never had Skillshare before, you can get a 2-week free preview. Brenda Bakker with 2 Ks, again, in the chat is all the text and links. But I love this watercolor scribble brush that she has. She also has a paper that comes with her brushes in the class. And part of the, when you take a Skillshare class, there's sometimes materials or tools that come with the class. And this one came with brushes and paper. And her paper is more complicated. It has 4 pieces of 4 layers that are set to different settings. And she made that to work with her brushes. What I love about this scribble, watercolor scribble brush she has is it's really just that. You just kind of scribble with it. And I just love, I love things with texture, as you probably know. Yeah, and then you can use that with a blender if you want. And so just to answer the question for Beverly, what do you do, what do you do with the smudge tool? And how is that different? You can use the smudge tool with any brush. So I'm picking a little airbrush, just a soft airbrush that I use sometimes. And when I set the smudge tool, because of the brush I picked, it smooths it out a certain way. If I picked a different brush for the smudge tool, like, well, if I pick Calvin's watercolor blender brush for the smudge tool, it really doesn't work good. See what I mean? So, smudge tool, interesting. That's with a different brush. So you can play around with it if you like. And there's nothing wrong with it, but I don't use it that much with watercolors. I really, again, I like that, stop doing that. I like that watercolor scribble brush a lot. Let's turn that, erase that layer, 3 fingers back and forth, and just do some more drawing with it, with that scribble brush. I think it's great for backgrounds and things. Just kind of random looking. And then in her class, she shows you other kinds of how to use the other brushes in the set. And she's also got a background splash brush. Now, someone asked me about watercolor stamps, and this one's a watercolor stamp. So every time you do it, it makes the same shape. I mean, it rotates sometimes and stuff, but it's gonna look fake if you try to stamp, make a bunch of splatters on your page with it, because they're all exactly the same. So I don't use stamp brushes a lot, even though they're kind of cool. You see, you can't draw with it. It only works when you tap it. So I don't use those a lot, but I do like having little brushes that are stamp brushes for splatter and dots and things, because I tend to throw paint at my real paintings and splatter all over them. I love the way that looks, so I like to do that here too. So those brushes are worth looking at. And again, Brenda Bakker, she's got Skillshare classes, and each of her classes has different brushes in it. But that one is one of my favorites. Okay, these brushes I freaking love. They are so cool. They are Stoni's watercolor brushes, S-T-O-N-I. And you see how they make it like darker around the edge and lighter in the middle? I just love how those work. So I'm gonna turn off everything in there and make a blank layer and just show you. They have a little bit of texture right in them. So let's see, where are hers? all my watercolor brushes. Where are you? Stoni's watercolor brushes. So she's got this big one, like background one. I don't use that one that much. I love these smaller ones she has, because see what happens when you color with it and you go over it in the middle again, it gets lighter. And the color changes some from, well, some of them have more color changing properties in them than others. And that's something that's interesting here. So this is called a watercolor background multicolor. And you can do this to any brush. So I tapped the brush, it's open, it's highlighted. I tapped it again and it comes up to the brush studio. And the way this is making multiple colors is you go down to this section called color dynamics, and it has it set for color pressure for the hue and saturation to change if you change your pressure. Now in the brush demo, that doesn't really show up a lot, but you saw it happening in the piece that I was coloring. So when I press harder, the color changes. So I like that. I like those brushes for that, but I really love how if I'm coloring something like that with the watercolor, I think that looks pretty realistic where the outside edge stays darker and the middle gets lighter. I just love the way that that works. So she's got one for lettering. So it's kind of smoothing out. And so I don't do watercolor lettering a lot, but I found that pretty easy to use if I wanted to write cursive or script. Then she's got a pressure sensitive one. It gets bigger. I just love the texture of these and how they work. So, and then I also, this one, I just love how they get lighter in the middle when you go over them, because a lot of times with watercolor, you know, when it dries, it gets lighter. So that's kind of cool to me how that works. So I use these a lot for just basic coloring on things when I want it to look watercolory. And see, it has a little bit of paper texture built right into it. So if I'm just doing something in a plain canvas and I don't want to mess with the watercolor paper stuff, these work good. And you can see, I don't understand quite how this works. It's a little bit beyond me, but you can see that it has two brushes combined. She did some really cool stuff. Stoni, I guess it's a woman, I don't know. They did some really cool stuff, since I don't know, with combining brushes in this new technique that came out for Procreate 5 that I have not figured out how to use yet. But I don't know. And these are free. So there's no reason not to get them. They're super fun to use. And I don't know, I would suggest everyone get those because they're so nice and they're free. Okay, this is another free set I really like. And how did I find these? In case you're wondering, I Googled the Procreate watercolor brushes and I probably spent a week looking at them and messing around because I do stuff like that. This is the, I think, Rowwenic. Doesn't have the name on the sample that they made. So let's look here. More water, even more water, granulation. Yes, it's called Rowwenic, again, in the chat and text. And it's got this set of brushes. Again, you can see from their sample, I downloaded this from where I got their brushes. This is also a free set. And you can see that there's texture built into the brushes. So just show you working with some of those. Here's the big water one. So see how light it comes out because it's big water. It's also, I have it set to the largest size so you don't have to draw giant with it. But you can see it's got nice texture in that one too. This whole set has that. So I really like these too. I forget to use this set a lot. two color granulation. I set that up probably. Granulation. See how it's, see how that's adding a little bit of, I don't know what granulation is, how to explain it if you have never used watercolor, but the color kind of separates and gets the pigments in the color separate into the paper. So the color is not as smooth or solid looking as a non-granulating pigment. So so maybe she has this brush actually does that automatically. Then I made a copy of the brush into two color granulation, and I went in and changed the color dynamics so that I don't remember what I did to it. I wanted the color to change as I used it, and then I turned that all off again. So we'll turn some color changing off for pressure. And then erase my palette there. Now, can you see what it's doing? It's totally weird because it's set to orange and it's painting blue. Sometimes if you turn the color change up too high, I turn that up to 43%, it changes it very far from the color you have picked. So by keeping the hue like within 10-15% of 0, the color you paint with will stay close to the color you have picked. So see, now I'm still getting a bluish color and it's blue selected. But if you wanted to just go crazy and get random colors, you could turn that up really far. So just more water, even more water, granulation. And then this really textured one that you can use at, see the texture in that? And then again, you can smudge these with the brush from Calvin at Drifter Studio if you have it, or you can use the smudge tool with some kind of other brush that you like the smooth airbrush or a misty one. I like to do it with something that's not too hard, that's like a soft edge one for smudging. Yeah. And so you don't need to buy Calvin's and use his brush for smudging. Just mess around with brushes that you have that are sort of soft edge and see what you like. Yeah. And of course, if you do it too much, it ends up taking away the texture of what you had painted. So it's always be careful not to use smudging or blending too much with the watercolor, or you lose the watercoloriness of it, which is fine since it's digital if that's what you want. But if you want it to look like watercolor, in my opinion, it's best to leave, you know, some of the randomness in, because that happens with real paint. So Rowwenic, these don't come with paper, these free ones. So if you want to use a watercolor paper with them, you can, but you'd have to get it elsewhere. So there's free ones online, as well as ones to purchase, the paper textures. Okay, last one I want to show you is Abbie Nurse's. Abbie's watercolor brushes, and she has 2 sets. There's this set of 4 that's free that I have, and then she has this huge set of watercolor brushes that is about $20. So if you want to, I don't have this because I already had tons of other brushes when I discovered it, and at this point I don't need another 92 Procreate water brushes, but it has like all kinds of things. It has stamp brushes, wash brushes, kind of has all the things that we've looked at and more in this big set that she made. But I'm going to show you how her little free set works, because it's kind of cool. All of these, I like all of these, and I would recommend any of them if you want to just try watercolor a little bit. So here's Abbie's watercolor. Oh, she also has a set of bubble brushes that I use a lot when I draw fish and mermaids and stuff. Abbie's bubble brushes. So I put them together with her watercolor for my own kind of ease of use here. So make a new layer and just kind of show you how some of her brushes work. So she has these tapering things on her brushes, which I haven't seen as much of in all the other brushes. Notice this one, it tapers when you pick the brush up. So it's kind of like a, I don't know what you call it, I don't remember, but one of those angled brushes that you can do watercolor with, where when you pick it up like that, it tapers off. And she has another one that is tapered at the beginning of the stroke. So when you start, it's like just touching the paper with the brush and then pressing harder if you were using a real watercolor brush. So these things are cool if you want to draw leaves, shapes, and things. And get in small, if you're in comics, these would be very useful because a lot of times we're coloring in small shapes, and the way that works, you can start in the corner of something and move into the center of it and not have to erase if it goes outside the lines. And then she just got this regular wash brush. This one works really nicely. Go away. Notice that if I'm painting a whole wash, it doesn't make too many hard edges in there. It does. If you go over an area multiple times, it will darken it, but it doesn't do that too much. So I like that as a background wash. And again, you can smudge out or blend out any of those parts you don't like. Let's try to use the same brush as a blender. So this is the brush I have selected in my brush. I'm going to press and hold the smudge. So now the smudge is set to the same brush. And I'm going to try to just smudge with it. I can make it bigger or smaller. Actually, it kind of works pretty cool to smudge it with the same brush you painted it with, because it kind of uses the same texture. A lot of times when I'm drawing, I will also set my eraser to the same brush I'm drawing with, so that when I erase, I get the same kind of edge. So that worked pretty cool, I think, using the smudge set to the same brush. Erase this again, 3 fingers back and forth. This is another texture one she has. So these are cool. So this is a very small sample of what's in her big set, but they're great for playing with. So, if you were changing colors, you can go on the same layer, or you could go on another layer. And I find, like, I love to paint with watercolors by adding layers. It feels like glazing to me. And then if I the only thing is though, so where I painted these, here's the pros and cons of working on layers. I painted these on the same layer. Now, if I wanted to smudge them together, and say I'm going to go into that Calvin at Drifter Studio spidery blender, I can blend these colors. I can make them really blend into each other. But if I have 2 colors on a separate layer, I can blend the green, but it's not really mixing it in with the purple because it's on another layer. So what I've essentially done is just smudged out the edge of the green, but no purple has gone into the green. Whereas here, both colors are, meshing together. But what's cool about multiple layers is if I decide that green's not quite right and it's on a separate layer, I can go into hue and saturation and kind of adjust that a little bit that way. So again, as in anything in Procreate, there is no right and wrong way to do it. You can, use watercolor paper for the texture and brushes that are smoother. You can use a plain canvas and get brushes that have more texture in them. And I don't have any really suggestion for anyone of the best way to do it, because we all enjoy doing things different ways. These are some just various things I got somewhere, and I don't even know where. And they have different textures. I don't use these that much. But again, whoever was asking about the stamps, you know, I don't find them incredibly useful, except for the speckles, like you know, splatter. But some people use them a lot. And if you find some of these and you find, you know, that there was a certain person that was teaching a class and using them, they will show you how they used them and you might like them. And I'm so sorry, there's a whole bunch of things in the chat and I was not following the chat. So let's look and see, do we have questions in there?
I had one, Donna, which is, do you leave your layer on normal? I usually put it on multiply.
Oh, it just depends what I'm doing. I love layer blend modes. So it just depends what I'm doing. So multiply, yeah. When you put the top layers and you're doing watercolor, if you change the top layer to multiply, the colors will mix more. And it's just kind of a weird difference because that's normal. But I sometimes just will go through and paint things and then just go through and look at all the blend modes and then I'll go, oh, that's cool. Sometimes I just like a really weird one for some reason. But yeah, a lot of people will do additional layers in watercolor in multiply because they feel like that makes the colors blend more the way they do when you're glazing on paper. But the watercolor brushes themselves paint somewhat transparently, so they're gonna, you can still see the purple through the green there, even if you leave it in normal, because of the brush itself is making a bit of a transparent mark. It's not really solid like a flatting brush that we would use for coloring that flat style in comics. A bunch of people, Beth says, have George's Mega Brush Pack. I have not used his brushes. Susan says she has, and I haven't used any of his brushes. I know they're really popular, but I don't have any of them. So Susan said none of them made it into her favorites, which is again a very personal thing, so I can't say. Yeah, so Susan says she keeps the colors on a separate layer. I do that sometimes I don't. I tend to I don't know, I like painting, so I just mush things together a lot on one layer when I'm painting. When I'm drawing in Procreate, I make a ton of layers. So let's see. Yeah, so Beth says this week we should all play with some brushes and techniques, some watercolor brushes and techniques, ones you already have, ones you search for and find free ones, ones you buy if you find something that looks really good, and share what you've done. That would be really, really cool. That would be really, really cool. So these are just some things I did with miscellaneous watercolor brushes in Procreate, just to show you how I did it. I did a, you know, one line contour thing of myself, and then I did a one layer of watercolor painting for it. And I could not tell you which brushes I used. This looks like that one from Brenda Bakker, and probably maybe Calvin's basic basic one. Forgot what he called it. Where are they? Abstract round. And then I have this, I use this brush a lot, and it's not from watercolor. It's just a gouache dry brush. I use it for all kinds of textures. I use it in hair a lot. I use it for everything. I would make tree bark out of that. I would make the grain in a wood table out of that. I make hair out of it. For some reason, I like that. It's from one of the gouache sets I got, a dry brush, and I use it with watercolor a lot to add some detail like that. I want to show you this one. I haven't really finished or decided what I'm going to do with it. This is from a vintage photo that I had found, and I kind of traced over it, like not you know, very loosely traced over it. And then I wanted to color it watercolor, but because let's see, I have that set to a clipping mask, so turn that off. So because the watercolor brushes, like I said, are transparent, when I painted it with watercolor, I could see the background through it, and I didn't like that. So I made another layer underneath the watercolor that I just painted solid white with my flatting brush so that the background didn't show through. So that's a useful thing for comics that we'll probably have a lot. If we're coloring things with watercolor, there will be other things we want to not see through them because they're not ghosts. So I just I used a flatting brush and I just drew the basic shape for them in solid white. And now if I finished watercoloring this by changing clothes, colors and things, it's already got the white under it. If I make it a clipping mask, just like we've done in other lessons, then when I watercolor the stuff, it doesn't go outside the lines. And that's the same as when we did with the flatting brush, except it's, not it's more textured and nuanced looking in the coloring. So that white layer is super handy for comics. So, and this is something you can do too, if you don't have anything that you want to color, or if you see some comics you like. So this is from Harrow County, which is one of my favorite comic series. And I love the way the watercolor was done on that. So this is from that book. And I found online that the artists had put a lot of their line work and pencils and inks and stuff to show the process. So I got the inks from that, and I colored it myself to see what it would come out like. And then I did my own inked version that would be more like if I inked it, how would I do it? And then I did it with the color. So I've done this with a lot of stuff, and it's really useful if you want to like try out different things. I'm like, well, how did the nose looks like so like 3D on that. And I like the way my nose came out too. Now this is actually real watercolor on paper. And I'm like, can I kind of reproduce a little bit of that feeling in Procreate? So I tried it out. And then I have a watercolor paper texture there that darkened up my colors a little. And I think, I was happy with how it came out, but that was like a really good thing. Copying stuff for practice is like so cool. I do it a lot. And Beth said in the chat, does anyone have the Big Wet Set by Marty B? No, I don't have that. I've kind of stopped getting a lot of brushes because I have so many. But there's so many good ones out there. And just like, you keep buying paints and paintbrushes and pastels and whatever. That's how the Procreate brushes get after a while. But yeah, tracing, Beth says she learns by tracing. And this is, you can do it in Procreate and on paper. What's really cool is if you trace different comics, if you're doing, this is nothing to do with watercolor. I did it for watercolor here because I was trying to, do some shading and highlights in the hair and things like that. I was trying to get some of those things from it. But if you trace comics, you can figure out what kind of brushes and pens to use to get the different kind of lines that the artist got. I found that so cool. Like I took some pictures from 3 or 4 comics that I had, and I just put them on a light box under paper, or you could take a picture of them and put them on your iPad if you want to work digitally. How the heck did this person make these lines? And if I wanted to do it in Procreate, what pen would I use to make lines like that? Like here, I used my drying pen, and you can see that my lines are completely different than that. But it's really practicing tracing stuff and copying the way it's colored is really, really useful. Really, really useful, in my opinion. So So I don't think I have anything else here that I wanted to show you. Well, yeah, one more thing, just one more thing. This is one of the pages I was talking to Susan about before we started recording, which is a kind of collage thing that I've been doing lately. So this is a real map, a real antique map that I stole off the internet. It's where my grandparents grew up. And then I made a watercolor of it, a really loose watercolor of it on paper, and put it in there. So you can see and I was working on the theme of in America, the streets are made of gold. So I painted the streets yellow, and this is where apartments are. And this is a big cemetery. So it's green for the grass. And then I put other things in. I put some text. This other text here is some brushes I got of fake antique text. I can just paste in. I have no idea what it says. It just looks cool. I use it like screened in the background. And then these are photos that I wanted to highlight certain parts of. So I drew over the photo first with my dry brush that I use for inking a lot. And then I used those Stoni's watercolor brushes to paint them, because like I said, I love how it gets more transparent and lighter in the different areas as you go over it. And I just love the effect of that on the antique, vintage photos. And because I wanted these to be real, but I didn't want to just throw in the photos. I wanted to like call out certain parts. So this really does say restaurant here, and there is a kid picking in the garbage. And then this is a picture of this lady sitting in her apartment holding 2 naked babies. But yeah, so I combined real watercolor and digital watercolor and other things all in the same thing. And I really like how this whole comic came out. Every other page was like that, and then the alternate pages are just black and white that I drew, and I still did collage in them and stuff. But anyhow, that's what I got to show you for my favorite watercolor brushes. I'm going to do watercolor all month for our Procreate sessions. So I'll probably do one where we go through a whole, like a comic panel and color the whole panel, how I would do that incorporating watercolor. But again, if you get any set of brushes, you want to go and take tutorials from that person first, find out how they use the brushes. Some of them work in very specific ways. And of course you can just play with them. Of course, you can always just play with them, but they're all a little different. So watching tutorials from that. And then I think in the last week, I think there's 2 more Wednesdays in our sequence for this month. It's 5 Wednesdays, I think. I will do one specifically on how to set up and use the watercolor paper textures. So that that takes some extra time. It's a little complicated to set them up yourself. There's a bunch to buy, but you can set them up yourself by taking pictures of watercolor paper or downloading free pictures of watercolor paper on, on the internet. And then I'll show you how to put the layers together and play with setting the blend modes and stuff to get it to work. So, but this week, get some watercolor brushes, just get some free ones if you don't have any yet, just to play around with and see what you can come up with. Just, we didn't draw anything specific drawings here. I just wanted to kind of demo the brushes, which ones had textures, which ones didn't, and things like that. So go for it and see what fun you can make or what trouble you can make. So any questions, any last questions before I? No?
Thank you, Donna. This is amazing. I'm new to this and it's just incredible. Thank you.
Oh, cool. You're welcome. There's a lot of basics in Procreate, and if you're really new to Procreate, I always recommend Lisa Bardot's beginner Procreate. She's got 1 or 2 beginner Procreate videos where she shows, just if you don't even know how to start a canvas and everything, those are really great for starters. And I just pick whatever I'm interested in every other Wednesday and show you guys what I'm doing. So yeah, okay, so share your experiments on the Mighty Network, and next week we will draw in 2 weeks, excuse me, we do this every other Wednesday. In 2 weeks we will draw, you know, I'll have a comic panel all ready to color, and we'll look at that together, and you know, how do we put some of these brushes together into coloring a comic panel. So all right,
Thanks, Donna.
see you all around.
That was great. Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
Donna.
Thank you,
Bye.
Donna.